Chapter 366, The Hanged Man's Ambition. After a thorough inspection, Klein confirmed that there was nothing odd about the White family, and that the couple didn't even leave a single strand of hair behind, apparently to prevent anyone from tracking them down using divination. He returned to the bedroom filled with dolls, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and went above the gray fog, intending to use divination for a final confirmation. However, before he got down to business, he conjured the female doll who was nearly his height, and just like how he had done a divination for the mutated sun sacred emblem in Tinjin City, he picked up a dark red fountain pen and wrote a sentence on the yellowish-brown goat skin: its origin. Putting down the pen and holding onto the piece of paper, Klein leaned back in his chair and began to mumble as he slowly adjusted his mental state into a cogitation state. After repeating this 7 times, his eyes turned dark and his eyelids drooped as he entered a deep slumber. In the gray space, he saw the puppet craftsman working with extraordinary concentration. He saw the red-eyed girl being placed in the room of dolls and Emlyn White fishing out his wallet with his eyes fixed on her. Finally, the scene stopped inside the bedroom where Klein was presently located. The proud vampire, Emlyn White, with his hair combed back diagonally, looked handsome but slightly delicate. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the doll affectionately, along with all the other dolls of different sizes.
He truly is a fanatic of dolls.
Klein opened his eyes and face-palmed. Soon after, he waved his hand, causing the puppet that he conjured to vanish from the space above the gray fog. When he was done, he picked up his fountain pen again and wrote another divination statement: Scenes of death in the last 10 years in 48 River Bay Avenue. According to the statements from the residents, the White family had been there for no more than 10 years, so Klein was able to lock onto a specific area, and he believed that if the White family were just superficially good monsters who were actually making disappearance cases all the time in order to suck warm, delicious blood, then it was impossible not to have any happen at home. In a period as long as 10 years, there would always be a few accidents as long as they didn't stop. After carefully checking the divination sentence, Klein recited it and entered cogitation again, rapidly falling into a dream. In the dusky world, his vision was sometimes pitch black, sometimes dotted with snowflakes, and sometimes splintered. However, no scenes appeared. This was the result of the divination. Nothing. No one had died in the last 10 years at 48 River Bay Avenue. By taking into account all the factors involved, it's possible to make a preliminary conclusion that the White family was a law-abiding vampire family, other than a few instances of petty theft. As Klein looked at the long, mottled bronze table in front of him, he wrapped himself with his spirituality and plummeted into the gray fog. Returning to the real world, he carefully removed the traces he had left behind and left 48 River Bay Avenue. Instead of making his final conclusion, he took a detour to the River Bay police station, where he easily sneaked into the archives by mixing himself in among the thieves and drunkards, allowing them to serve as a foil for his disguise. There, he boldly lit the gas lamps inside. Then, Klein pulled out the last 10 years of missing persons records and paged through them. From time to time, the police officers on duty would pass by the door, but their eyes didn't notice any light leaking out from the archives.
There's nothing suspicious at all.
After an unknown period of time, the black-gloved Klein placed the docket back. Then he turned off the gas lamp, took off his hat in the darkness, pressed his hand to his chest, and bowed towards the lobby. On his way back to Minsk Street, Klein took a shower, changed his clothes, sat down at his desk, and spread out the map of Backland that he had first bought on the steam locomotive. The first thing he did was find Rose Street, which was on the south side of the bridge where the Harvest Church was located. This was where Father Yutrovsky was the bishop of the cathedral, and had Emlyn White imprisoned in his basement. Soon after, Klein's gaze moved as he familiarized himself with the names and layout of the surrounding streets.
A performance can't be done too hastily or with an excessive thirst for success. One has to slowly immerse the audience into the act.
Klein whispered, unfolding a piece of paper and lowering his pen. Dear Detective Stewart, I wonder if you found Emlyn White. I've been keeping an eye out for you lately, and one of my informants told me today that he has seen this man on Tuteva Street in the area south of the bridge. Of course, he simply said that the person he saw looked similar to the man in the portrait. Putting down the pen, Klein folded the letter neatly, stuffed it into an envelope, and affixed a black stamp worth 1 penny. Above the vast, boundless Sonya Sea, with undulating waves churning beneath it, the Blue Avenger advanced forward steadily, without any signs of shaking. Alger Wilson sat in the captain's cabin with a brass sextant in his hand, but his eyes were closed. Without a sound, a smile suddenly appeared on his face.
I finally digested it.
Alger opened his eyes and raised his hands, causing the surroundings to glow with an azure light. The azure lights intersected and turned into a huge wave that swept forward. Alger pressed his hands together, and the wave disintegrated, turning into countless raindrops that fell onto the deck. After nearly 4 months, his seafarer potion had finally been digested. During this period of time, not only had he spent a long time wandering the seas, completing all the missions assigned to him by the church, but he had also deliberately sought out new sea routes and sought out undiscovered islands. After a few setbacks, he was finally met with success. This, in turn, led to the digestion of the potion, allowing him to figure out his principles as a seafarer. The core principle involved being intimate with the sea, to masterfully grasp information regarding sea routes and the weather, as well as exploration and discovery. The always heavy Alger couldn't help getting out of his seat. He paced back and forth in the captain's cabin, thinking of the future he longed for. After obtaining the potion formula for the Wind-Blessed and finding the corresponding Beyonder ingredients, he would hide his advancement to Sequence 6 from the church. Then he would repeat the same process again, striving to become a Sequence 5 ocean songster within 3 years. During this process, he had to serve as the captain of the Blue Avenger and avoid entering the mandated Punishers with its complicated social relationship, so as to prevent his secret from being exposed.
Once I'm promoted to Sequence 5 and gain sufficient strength, I'll be able to secretly return to that place.
Alger subconsciously looked to his right. His gaze seemed to pierce through the planks of the ship and the vast sea, and onto an ancient and hidden island. Alger wasn't worried about his future advancement within the church. Once he fulfilled his wishes, he would be able to fully focus on seeking a higher position in the church. At that time, he would continue to disguise himself as a Sequence 7 despite being a Sequence 5 and drink another Wind-Blessed potion. This would increase his Beyonder characteristics, strengthen him, and slow his digestion, but it wouldn't endanger his own safety. For the same reason, after Sequence 5 was completely digested, he could imbibe another ocean songster and repeat the normal process. This would only push him closer to losing control, but he also had solutions to that. It was to find a woman to marry and transfer the extra Beyonder characteristics to his children.
After doing this, I'll be able to move closer to the level of a cardinal and approach the level of a high sequence Beyonder. This is my chance in such an era.
In his mind, Alger had already sketched out the image of himself wearing the robe of a cardinal as he occupied a high position in the church and had many mandated punishers under his control. After being intoxicated for a moment, he withdrew his gaze and regained his senses.
What follows will increase in difficulty with each step. Fortunately, I have the tarot gathering and Mr. Fool, although there are dangers underlying it as well. Any path to improving myself will involve risk. I have to try to gather those Roselle diary pages as quickly as possible. I should grab the chance to raise a question and understand what that card beside Mr. Fool's hand is. The one which only shows its back. It wasn't there previously. Card. Roselle's diary. Could it be the item I'm thinking of?
Alger's eyes narrowed as his pupils constricted. 15 Minsk Street. Klein yawned, switched off the gas lamp, and slipped into bed. Cods. He originally had another plan. He had wanted to use divination to grasp the origin of the biological poison bottle and obtain the first 3 potion formulas for the sequence from the werewolf Beyonder characteristic. But after a busy night dealing with the matter regarding Emlyn White, he felt a little tired and decided to try again the next day above the gray fog. Just as he lay down and closed his eyes, Klein suddenly felt that something was wrong. This was the spiritual intuition of a seer.
It has already been several days since I obtained the werewolf beyonder characteristics and the biological poison bottle. It's not like I haven't been in a good mental state during this period of time, yet I have been repeatedly delaying the divination. This is very abnormal.
Klein sat up, carefully thought about it, and recalled a similar incident. The first time he met Megose, he had wanted to directly use his spirit vision to observe her mental state, but he naturally ended up missing the opportunity due to momentarily being taken aback. It was only at the end that he found out that it was because Megose had an evil god spawn in her stomach. His spiritual intuition as a seer had stopped him without leaving a mark, preventing him from losing control and collapsing right on the spot.
It's very similar, and this time, it's even more obvious. I remember that Miss Sharon mentioned that the Rose School of Thought's control over their members far exceeds my imagination. Everyone's body and soul seem to be bound by something, which is also the reason why information regarding the mutant sequence is rarely leaked out. They believe in the chained god. So, when using the beyonder characteristic of a werewolf to deduce the corresponding potion formulas, it would directly involve this evil god and bring about consequences that I don't wish to bear.
Klein thought about it seriously and felt that there was something suspicious about it.
Back when I divined the mutated sun's sacred emblem and the year left behind by the listener, my spiritual intuition hadn't stopped me. Could it be that the chained god is stronger than the eternal blazing sun and the true creator? Or could it be that his nature allows him to restrain the gray fog and even be able to effectively invade it? Of course, the source of the danger can also be the biological poison bottle.
Thinking of this, Klein, who was always cautious, decided to attempt divining the biological poison bottle tomorrow and see if his seer's spiritual intuition would stop him. Chapter 367, Threatening Letter. Tuesday morning, the weather remained as cold as it usually was this season. Klein tightened the collar of his tweed coat, put on his hat, and pulled open the door. He was heading to the end of the street where the mailbox was, to post a letter to Detective Stewart. Since it wasn't that far, there was no need to dress neatly or heavily, but Klein had just recovered from his cold, so he had wrapped himself up thickly just in case. Perhaps it was because of the strong wind last night, but the air in Backland was surprisingly good. Klein subconsciously slowed down his pace and enjoyed this rare morning. As he passed Jurgen's house, he heard the oriel window creak open and instinctively turned to look. Standing at the window was Mrs. Doris, wearing a black plush hat and a thick grayish-blue scarf. She looked even worse than before, and her body was even more hunched. Old Granny Doris bent down and picked up the black cat with green eyes.
Good morning, Detective Moriarty. Thank you for taking care of Brody. He said you were a good man, didn't you, Brody?
Brody used all 4 of his limbs and struggled in her embrace. Finally, he jumped down and lightly landed on the windowsill. But instead of leaving, he circled around and around, nuzzling Mrs. Doris with its head on one side, without even looking at Klein. Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh and smiled sincerely.
Was he being friend-zoned by a cat? It's a happy deed, and even more delightful news is that you've recovered and have been discharged from the hospital.
After exchanging a few pleasantries, he said goodbye and continued to walk down the street with a smile on his face. He had only taken a few steps when he heard Mrs. Doris call after him.
When Jurgen comes back, I'll have him pay you.
The smile on Klein's face suddenly froze. He could only half turn around and wave his hand, indicating that he understood.
Do I look like I took this mission for the money?
When he was far away from Jurgen's house, his expression gradually turned serious, and he sighed faintly. He had just activated his spirit vision to look at Mrs. Doris's aura and found that her situation wasn't too good. It wasn't only because of her old age, but also because of the cold weather and bad air in Backland. All of these had a very bad effect on her lung disease. And Kaka, Klein mumbled, came to the mailbox and stuffed the letter in.
Mrs. Doris should be able to make it through this late autumn and winter, but it will be hard to say for the next one, or the next one. If she wants to live for a few more years, She would have to move to the south, to the area around Desi Bay. It's a pity that it's likely that lawyer Jurgen can't afford to do so now. Even I haven't been to Desi Bay.
This was the prelude to his performance, and this evening he would head to the Harvest Church as a detective and do the rest of the preparations. Ghazadia. After buying a Desi pie for breakfast, Klein returned via his original path and was quite at ease. Before he got close to the house, he saw an elegantly decorated carriage parked outside. Two ladies in black hats and a ribbon were anxiously pulling on his doorbell, while the maids and bodyguards were scattered around, as though they were on guard against something. With the paper bag containing the Desi pie in hand, Klein approached and said with a laugh,
Mrs. Stelling, Ma'am Mary, do they have something to entrust me with? They look very anxious. Andon. Ladies, it should be time for breakfast.
When they turned back to see Detective Sherlock Moriarty, Ma'am Mary was visibly relieved.
Mr. Detective, you have to help me.
In Klein's spirit vision, there was nothing fake about her anxiety, nervousness, and fear. Therefore, he nodded his head, pointed at the door, and said,
Let's talk inside.
As he spoke, he glanced at his landlady, Stellan, and he noticed that her condition was entirely different from the past 2 days. She had become very low and dejected, as though she wasn't interested in anything at all. Klein took out his key and opened the door.
What happened to her? Although his landlady liked to show off a little, she's someone who loves life a lot.
After entering, before she could sit still, Ma'am Mary impatiently said,
Detective Moriarty, I received a threatening letter.
Klein put down the Desi pie, clasped his hands, and asked,
Threatening letter? Oh, what does the letter say?
Ma'am Mary glanced sideways at Mrs. Stellan, and seeing that she wasn't quite as active as usual, she said, after some deliberation,
That letter asked me to handle the smoke of the factory impartially when I carry out the atmospheric pollution investigation and to acknowledge their contributions, or else I would end up like the doll that came with the letter. The doll's head was ripped off, and its arms and legs were broken.
Ma'am Mary seemed to recall the feeling when she opened the letter, and she said with a trembling voice,
This is the first time I've encountered something like this. I don't know if it will become a reality or not. I didn't know that I would have to experience such cases when I became a member of the Investigation Council. I didn't know.
Klein solemnly nodded his head and said,
Ma'am, perhaps Emperor Roselle once said that there are only two ultimate forms of hatred between people. One is to murder the other person's parents, and the other is to destroy another person's means of earning money. May I go up, and my suggestion is to report it to the police.
From his point of view, Ma'am Mary was now a member of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council. Her status was completely different from before, and the police would certainly not take the threats she received lightly. Moreover, this involved the development of a governmental policy and wasn't an ordinary matter, so there was a high probability that the police department would hand the case over to the Churches Beyond our organization in order to solve this case as soon as possible. Based on Ma'am Mary's status as a follower of the goddess, the Nighthawks was an inevitable choice. This way, even if Klein wanted a share of the reward, he didn't want to involve himself in it. Ma'am Mary pursed her lips and said,
I've already done so, but it doesn't reassure me. Do you know what they said? They said that threatening letters were formed by cutting the words from newspapers, and the doll could be bought from anywhere. It would be very difficult to find the sender in a short period of time, and they only sent one policeman to protect me. Goddess, is this how they treat a helpless citizen's cry for help?
Ma'am Mary paused, looked earnestly at Klein, and said,
Detective Moriarty, I believe you can help me, not only because of your performance from that matter, but also because of Mike's approval, Aaron's praise, and Talim's extolment. And I know you made a great contribution in that serial murder case. Don't worry, I will pay you well enough.
No matter what the situation is, it will be different from how the situation is handled now.
Your words make me happy, but something doesn't seem right. Unless the police have already been bribed, they would probably transfer the case to the Nighthawks, and with beyonder means such as divination available, it would be impossible for a letter made up of words from a newspaper to avoid detection. The sender would have either been caught already, or they would have means to interfere with divination. The latter would only lead to a formal and large-scale intervention by the Nighthawks.
Klein didn't answer Ma'am Mary right away, but he carefully analyzed the abnormality of this matter. The living room suddenly became unusually quiet. The feeling of silence made Ma'am Mary and Mrs. Stellan somewhat uneasy for some unknown reason. At some point in time, Klein had fished out a coin and made it bounce and roll between his fingers, as though it were a habit of his to focus his thoughts. Suddenly, the coin flew up and then fell down steadily onto the palm of his hand, its back facing up. Klein was surprised. He was divining whether this matter involved danger, but it turned out to have none. Klein suddenly thought of another possibility as he smiled and said,
If such a threat really exists, even if the sender doesn't have considerable abilities, it would still result in a certain degree of danger. It's impossible to have none. Is it just a simple threat? Or, Ma'am Mary, don't worry, you can go back home in peace. If someone comes to you in the next 2 days to discuss this issue so as to make it public, allowing the citizens to know the true intentions of those factory owners in order to incite anger among the public, then you will be fine.
The possibility which Klein had just thought of was that the threat was a trap set up by the council so as to incite the public to use their anger, allowing the atmospheric pollution investigation to be carried out smoothly and lead to the subsequent bill which could benefit them. This would explain why the police are responding in this manner. Ma'am, Mary asked, frowning.
Why do you say that?
Klein smiled and replied,
That's what I've deduced.
Ma'am Mary pressed.
And if what you claim doesn't happen in 2 days?
Klein said sincerely.
Then I will provide protection.
He added inwardly.
In any case, there's no danger.
After comforting and sending off Ma'am Mary, he went above the gray fog to confirm the matter and received the same result as before. By then, his Desi pie had turned cold. Ma'am Mary returned home with some apprehension and uneasiness, wondering if she should invite Stellan to stay with her for a few days. At that moment, her housekeeper informed her that the eldest son of Earl Hall, the chief secretary of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council, Mr. Hibbert Hall, had come. After both of them entered the living room, before Ma'am Mary could even open her mouth to speak, the handsome blonde gentleman spoke first.
Ma'am Mary, I've heard of what has happened to you. It's a disgrace to Backland, and even to the whole kingdom, and I'm deeply sorry for it. Don't worry, everyone in the committee will stand with you.
Ma'am Mary responded gratefully.
Thank you for your concern.
After a moment of consideration, Hibbert Hall said,
Ma'am, I wish to get a reporter to interview you regarding this incident. I want to tell everyone about what happened to you and how despicable this act is. I want to let everyone see how outrageous those people who have contaminated Backland's air are. There's no sign of repentance. Please agree to my request.
Ma'am Mary was momentarily at a loss for words.
It's exactly as Detective Moriarty described.
After breakfast, Klein rested for a while. Since he had nothing better to do, he went above the gray fog in preparation to divine the origin of the biological poison bottle. This time he didn't delay it at all. Chapter 368, taking him by surprise. The stone pillars of the ancient and majestic palace supported the high dome. Klein sat at the end of the long bronze table holding a translucent brown bottle. He checked it over and over again, but he didn't sense any danger from it. He thought.
Let's begin.
He conjured a pen and paper and wrote the divination statement, its origin. Putting the fountain pen away and bracing himself for a blow, Klein glanced at the paper and the biological poison bottle, leaned back in his chair, and entered cogitation while reciting the statement. Soon he entered a hazy gray dream world and saw a dark but spacious room. There were king cobras, black widows, and other strange plants and animals in the room. It was a messy and harrowing scene. A middle-aged man in a white coat was standing in front of a long table in the middle of the room. He threw the snake gall and spider venom into the huge black pot that hung from the ceiling. In the end, he even put in a few items that possessed a strong spiritual luster. For example, they would sometimes disperse into a black gas, and other times condense into dark green lung-shaped objects. Otherwise, they would be in the form of a tube containing a clear azure liquid or fiery red eyes. The air around the black iron pot gradually became viscous. It was gathering towards the center, but it was constantly being pushed aside, making it difficult to achieve its goal. When the white-robed, middle-aged man saw this scene, his brow slowly creased. His expression looked slightly anxious. He flipped through the black notebook by his side, gritted his teeth, and used a ritual silver dagger to slice open his wrist. Drops of fresh blood dripped into the black iron pot, seemingly breathing life into its contents instantly. A terrifying suction force suddenly erupted, sucking in all the viscous air around it. The scarlet blood, which had yet to leave his wrist, was fully sucked into it. And that wasn't everything. Regardless of how the white-robed, middle-aged man struggled to resist, or how he revealed a terrified expression, he couldn't prevent his body from approaching the iron pot. His body was stretched, his head was compressed, and amidst his screams he was eaten, little, by the pot. The hanging specimens, plants, and anything that could move or be moved, all flew into the pot. Brown fog suddenly filled the room, quietly ebbing and flowing. By the time it was all over, the room was empty, except for the brown, translucent bottle lying quietly in the middle of the clearing. The scene quickly faded away, and the dream world shattered. Klein opened his eyes and muttered to himself.
So the biological poison bottle is a product of a death-seeking experiment. I thought it was a beyonder characteristic left behind by some beyonder. If that were the case, I'd have been able to divine a formula.
To Klein, a rampager's spirituality and beyonder characteristic, as well as a spirituality and beyonder characteristic which was contaminated by an evil god, could all be used to divine a formula, just like the all-black eye which Marionettist Rosago left behind. It was thanks to the isolation effects of the gray fog, and how the mysterious space was able to eliminate negative influences, giving him the ability to court death. Of course, a beyonder characteristic involved many other additional factors. In theory, the chances of failure were extremely high, but Klein only had the confidence to do so after advancing to magician. Similarly, a sealed artifact formed by beyonder characteristics could also be used to divine the formula for a potion. However, if they were mainly ingredients, then through the production processes and dangerous experiments done by an artisan or other beyonders, turning them into mystical items, then Klein's divination would be useless at his current state. Even with the enhancement effect provided by the mysterious space above the gray fog, it was useless.
Not bad. At least I don't have to worry about the biological poison bottle having any other latent risks anymore.
Klein glanced at the werewolf Fang and wisely abandoned his curiosity. In Empress Burrow, the opulent villa of Earl Hall, Audrey continued her study of psychology. By her feet, the huge golden retriever Susie was sitting there, her eyes shining. From time to time, she wagged her tail, as if enjoying the scene. Psychiatrist Escalante finished the introduction material and deliberately made a casual remark.
Actually, there is such a theory. It's believed that humans would inherit a certain amount of their ancestors' consciousness over the generations, thus forming the underlying logic of one's behavior patterns. For example, although many people have never seen a poisonous snake, they would instinctively feel afraid and wish to avoid it once they encounter one. Why is that? This is theorized to be an instinct that we inherited from our ancestors, something that is hidden in the deepest recesses of our consciousness. In ancient times, people constantly fought with poisonous snakes and all kinds of ferocious animals, and they gradually carved this memory into their consciousness and passed it down.
How does it get passed down?
Audrey asked with interest. Escalante, with her long hair which reached her waist, laughed.
That's a very good question. Some people provide explanations that involve a theory that everyone's consciousness is actually connected at the lowest level. It is one entity, and the traces and characteristics left behind on this entity will affect the consciousness that belongs solely to them. For example, the lowest level of consciousness is like an endless ocean. Our unique consciousness would be the island situated in the ocean and can be split into two parts. One is hidden under the water, which is the subconscious, which is higher in both quantity and size. The other is exposed on the surface of the ocean, the superficial consciousness that can usually be detected. This is the axiom of this school of thought in psychology.
Audrey glanced at Susie, stroked the golden fur on its neck, and said,
So, we can use this connected ocean to influence the consciousness of others and achieve the goal of curing certain mental illnesses? This is the mysticism foundation and beyond our powers of a psychiatrist? But it doesn't seem enough and is lacking something. For example, the sky above one's head, the sky which shrouds everything?
Audrey curiously thought as she wore a look of confused enlightenment.
You're really talented in this area.
Escalante praised in delight.
However, we can only affect a portion of the surrounding ocean, and through it, we can affect those who are close to us. If we venture deeper into the ocean, it will be easy for us to lose ourselves.
She looked up at the ornate and complicated clock on the wall, smiled, and said,
Time's up. This is the end of today's class. Ms. Audrey, if you're interested in this psychological school of thought, then we can continue talking about it next time.
All right.
Audrey stood up and bowed. Watching Escalante leave, she nodded in thought.
Ma'am, Escalante doesn't seem like a real psychiatrist. At most, she's like me, a telepathist. Was what she just talked about the axioms of the psychology alchemists? They really are patient. Why aren't they trying to recruit me yet?
As Audrey was in thought, Susie commented happily from the side.
Audrey, I feel like she's the same type of person as us. No, I mean the same type of dog. No, that's not right. Woof.
Susie, who only had a rudimentary grasp of the human language, fell into a state of confusion, unable to find the right words to describe her feelings. South of the bridge, Rose Street, outside the Harvest Church. Klein, in his normal disguise, looked up at the sacred emblem of life on the facade, held his cane, climbed the steps, and stepped through the main door. The first thing he had to do was to confirm the situation. Only by doing this could he perform better so as to ingeniously rescue the vampire, Emlyn White, without garnering suspicion. Then, as a detective who had provided clues, he could receive the gratitude from the White family and gain the applause of an audience. It was bound to be an interesting performance. The Harvest Church wasn't big, as it only had a prayer hall. Klein found a spot by the aisle and looked ahead as he took off his hat. Bishop Utrovsky was preaching. His height of more than 2.2 meters and his burly physique, which couldn't be concealed by his loose priest robes, gave off an extreme sense of oppression. However, his expression was one of extreme gentleness, filled with appreciation and gratitude towards life. In front of such a priest, no one dared to cause a ruckus. The few believers quietly listened, occasionally making prayer gestures unique to the Church of Earth Mother. Klein watched carefully, waiting patiently, neither conceited nor rash. As the sermon ended, he gripped his cane and prepared to get up, to proceed with his subsequent plans. At this moment, a man wearing the priest robes of the Church of Earth Mother entered from the door that led to the room at the back of the cathedral. He looked 28 or 29 years old, had black hair and red eyes, possessing a high nose and thin lips. He was handsome but didn't give off masculine vibes. He was none other than Emlyn White. Klein's mouth gaped a little and nearly failed to close it.
Isn't this guy supposed to be locked up in the basement? Wasn't he shouting about how determined he was, that he would absolutely not submit to Bishop Utrovsky's will?
Emlyn White distributed the communion to one believer after another, and he finally stopped in front of Klein. Klein's mind whirred, and he immediately, in a low voice,
Are you Emlyn White? Your parents entrusted my friend to look for you. Why are you here? Did you encounter something? Are you in need of assistance?
Emlyn White didn't seem to have his unique pride, and said with a smile that only looked slightly better than crying,
There's no need. I will be returning home soon.
He pursed his lips, shook his head, and forced a smile, saying,
I am already a believer of Earth Mother. No, a priest.
This answer was completely out of Klein's expectations. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond, and he could only shout repeatedly in his mind.
Hey, you were very adamant about your worship of the moon the last time we interacted at the Harvest Church. You said that you would absolutely not convert to believing in Earth Mother. How long has it been? And you've already given in. Isn't that way too fast? What about your persistence? Where's your moral integrity? My carefully prepared performance has been forced to end before it has even begun. This is just taking me by surprise.
Klein opened his mouth and suddenly realized something amiss.
Why is Emlyn White informing me of his conversion? I'm just a detective, who accidentally chanced upon him while passing by. Does he wish for me to pass this message to his parents? Is there another meaning behind this?
While Klein was guessing, Emlyn White put away his worried and smiled smugly.
You don't have to act, Mr. Detective, or should I call you the new owner of the Master Key? Hey, to a noble sanguine, everyone has a different smell and has different blood characteristics. Even when I was locked up in the basement, I could smell it. I remember your smell.
Chapter 369, Inception.
I've been recognized.
Klein instantly fell into shock as he nearly entered combat mode. Even if he didn't use his spirit vision, he could tell from Emlyn White's tone and words that he wasn't lying. He was very confident and certain. Just as the tense feelings rose in him, Klein suddenly thought of something.
Why should I worry about that?
Then he answered his own question in his mind.
So what if I was recognized? The current situation is different from what it was 2 months ago. I was left flustered by the incident with Ambassador Bakerland in front of the official Beyonders. I was rushing around, trying to grasp at every possible straw. In the process, I ended up making contact with Beyonder circles, and even the possibility of me becoming a Beyonder was quite plausible. Therefore, even if my identity as a Beyonder was exposed, they wouldn't think too deeply about it and dig up my past. And it's very likely that Detective Isengard Stanton is a Beyonder, and he maintains good relations with the police and the official Beyonder organizations. He had speculated that I was the same as him and tried to gently rope me in. In this regard, I can barely be counted as a borderline member of the official Beyonders, and if anything were to happen, I wouldn't necessarily be imprisoned. More importantly, I have already made my current image so deeply ingrained that I don't have to worry about any wanted posters. If anything goes wrong, then I can just abandon 15 Minsk Street and my identity as Sherlock Moriarty. So what's there to worry about? Yes, before I came here, I had also performed a divination, and the revelation was that there was almost no danger.
As these thoughts flashed across his mind, Klein's contracted pupils, slightly appalled expression, and his fight-or-flight state eased as if he was discussing the day's weather with Emlyn White. Seeing his calm expression, Emlyn White raised his eyebrows, took a few steps to the side, and squeezed past him before slowly sitting to his side. The vampire looked at Bishop Utravsky, who was leading the believers in the rite of Holy Communion, and he said with a sneer,
Mr. Detective, aren't you afraid that I'll go to the police station and shout out loud that you're a Beyonder?
Similarly, Klein looked forward and said without turning his head,
I'll go with you and shout out loud that there's a vampire. Come on, let's have an internecine outcome. Do you think I'm afraid of you?
Emlyn White's expression stiffened. He raised his right index finger and said,
Sanguine, a noble sanguine. Got it?
Before Klein could speak, seeing that Bishop Utravsky was preoccupied with the rites of Holy Communion, Emlyn White chuckled and said,
Regardless, I'm finally going to be free. I pretended to submit and told the old man that I was willing to convert to believing in Earth Mother and was deeply penitent for what I had done. Although I have no idea what was necessary to show repentance, it's not a problem to put on an act. That old man actually believed me like this, and he was very happy as well. He let me out on the spot, and he let me become a priest here. He told me that as long as I memorized the Holy Bible of the Church of Earth Mother, he would allow me to return home. Haha, that old fogey, who's all brawn and has become silly from his faith, sure is easy to fool.
Easy to fool? Klein turned his head to look at the vampire. Looking smug, he looked forward and said,
Father Utravsky used to be a pirate. He probably killed far more people than the number of people your father has ever saved. Furthermore, most pirates don't trust their fellow crew members. Betrayal and trickery are common among them. To be a relatively successful pirate, able to live to the end, Father Yutrowski wouldn't be a person who's easily fooled, even if he's not a bright person.
Emlyn White wore a look of disbelief as he wished to retort. Klein rubbed the top of his cane and leisurely added,
Father has a powerful sealed artifact in his possession. It is known as the mental terror candle. It can allow the wielder to enter the deepest recesses of the target's soul. There, no one can lie. Moreover, this is only one of its uses. I don't know if it has any other abilities.
Emlyn gradually froze, his eyes losing focus. After a dozen seconds, he whispered with a pale expression,
When I said I was willing to change my faith, that old man came in with a lantern. There was a candle in the lantern, and I didn't get a good look at it.
Klein tilted his head and gave Emlyn White a sympathetic glance.
Perhaps Father Yutrowski used it to plant a seed in you, one that gradually and thoroughly makes you wholeheartedly believe in Earth Mother.
The corner of Emlyn's mouth twitched, revealing a smile comparable to a zombie's.
I don't feel anything at all. It shouldn't be anything like you said. Besides, aren't my parents coming? They can blame the priest through ordinary people, saying that he forcefully detained me, forcing him to make a choice between sullying the Church of Earth Mother's reputation and letting me go. Isn't that a great idea?
Klein maintained his look of pity, clasped his hands and raised them to his nose, acting truly penitent.
If I were Father Yutrowski, I would choose to call the police and have them determine the truth. Tell me, who do you think will suffer in the end? The bishop who has the right to preach? Or a vampire?
Sanguine. Sanguine.
Emlyn White's facial muscles seemed to twitch. He clenched his fist and punched the back of the pew in front of him.
I can wait. Once I memorize the Holy Bible, I will ask the old man to let me return. He is a truly devout person and will not break his promise.
Klein didn't turn his head and said with a smile,
I've been to 48 River Bay Avenue. Your parents have already moved away.
Naturally, not only will they move away, they will also move to somewhere I'm not aware of.
Emlyn White responded without hesitation. Klein added with a relatively relaxed tone,
They moved in a hurry. They left a lot of things behind, such as the things in your room.
Emlyn White's expression suddenly became extremely wonderful. He gaped his mouth, abruptly stood up, squeezed past Klein, and rushed towards Bishop Yutrowski, who stood in front of the sacred emblem of life.
Father Bishop, I want to return home. I want to return home. I want to return home.
Emlyn shouted. Seeing that there were still believers who hadn't finished their Holy Communion yet, Father Yutrowski didn't respond. He merely gave the pitiful vampire a calm look. Emlyn quickly shut his mouth and became quiet. He paced back and forth, looking extremely anxious. Smiling, Klein stood up, took his cane and hat, and strolled down the aisle to the front pew of the cathedral's hall. When Holy Communion was over, he walked up to Father Yutrowski and said with a serious expression,
Bishop, I don't know why you're retaining Emlyn here, nor do I want to know. I only know one thing. His parents have entrusted me to take him back.
Klein secretly thought,
If this giant-like priest agrees to my request so easily, I can only light a vigil candle for this vampire, Emlyn. No, I'm sure he will hate candles from this day forth. It's best to mourn for him.
Father Yutrowski looked down at them and replied gently,
Emlyn can return home at any time.
Klein gave Emlyn White a glance, raised his right hand, and tapped his chest. He wanted to gesture the sign of the crimson moon by tapping in a clockwise fashion, but in the end, he forced himself to draw the triangular sacred emblem. Emlyn became rather anxious from the look Klein gave him. Without a word, he rushed to the door of the cathedral and left without a hitch. Klein followed him at a moderate pace without any signs of anxiety. After proceeding forward in what appeared like a jog, Emlyn suddenly slowed down and said in a daze,
I feel like I'm starting to miss the Harvest Church, the feeling of memorizing the Holy Bible and the sacred emblem of life. I wish to return to clean and tidy the place. It'll only take an hour. An hour.
This planted seed is even more vicious than I had imagined. No matter where this vampire goes, he will return to the Harvest Church every day and work for an hour. That's actually quite all right. At the very least, the seed, which was planted, didn't change Emlyn's faith. In a way, he's showing him some respect, but why did I use the word respect? That candle is called Mental Terror Candle, and it's said to be from a dragon. The spectator pathway is rather scary.
Klein tapped his cane and said,
Do you need me to remind you of anything?
There's no need.
Emlyn's expression distorted as he angrily said,
I will fight this feeling. I'm going to move to Mid-Seashire or Faceac. I don't believe that I'd still wish to return when I've left Backland.
He gritted his teeth and suddenly exhaled.
Let's take the carriage back to River Bay Avenue.
Klein responded nonchalantly. After a few steps, Emlyn stopped a rental carriage. Just as he was about to board the carriage, his back stiffened for 2 seconds. Then he said so quietly that Klein could barely hear him,
I don't have any money on me.
I do.
Klein smiled. Emlyn stopped talking and got onto the carriage. Klein sat across him, and as the carriage began to move off, he asked, as if in thought,
Your father is a doctor? One that possesses outstanding skills in drugs and medicine?
Although he was listless, Emlyn raised his chin out of habit.
This is the gift that we Sanguine enjoy. The most outstanding potion masters are all from the Sanguine.
Is that so? Klein whispered to himself, his thoughts a mystery. Emlyn said after a moment of silence,
Write to your friend and tell him that I have returned to River Bay Avenue. My parents will come looking for me.
All right.
Klein answered simply. After nearly 20 minutes, the carriage pulled into River Bay Avenue and stopped in front of Unit 48. After paying the fare, Klein got out of the carriage and saw Emlyn White look towards the bedroom, his expression becoming abnormally excited. Restraining himself, the vampire pressed his hand to his chest and bowed deeply at Klein.
In any case, I must thank you.
Klein immediately revealed a smile.
There's no need to thank me. The bounty reward of finding you and the transportation fees will be obtained from your parents. Also, you have to concoct a medicine with beyonder effects to help me treat a patient. This is the reward that your family should pay.
Chapter 370. The Audience's Applause. Bounty reward, transportation fees, and medicine with beyonder effects. Emlyn White was left momentarily dazed when he first heard that. This was not the answer that he had expected. The vampire thought in shock.
What about your gentle manliness?
Klein looked at Emlyn White as he joked and lampooned silently.
As a detective, abiding by clear accounting principles is necessary. Besides, you've even delayed my visit to the Quelaag Club. I don't know what food they've offered in limited supply for the past 2 days.
After a few seconds, Emlyn forced a smile and said,
I have to see the patient before I can concoct the appropriate medicine.
Klein nodded thoughtfully.
From your tone, you sound really confident.
He then thought of a problem.
The White family seems to be a family of outstanding potion scholars. If I were to really be injured and poisoned, then I can come to them for treatment. Wouldn't all of my efforts of going out of my way to get the apothecary formula from Father Yutrovsky be for naught? I no longer need to nurture another aid that's good at healing. Reality sure does change faster than a plan. However, it's not really a waste either. I've already made back my investment from Miss Magician. For things like formulas, as long as it exists, it will always be valuable. Besides, the White family will definitely stay away from River Bay Avenue and live their lives with new secret identities. I might not be able to find them, so it's not that convenient. No, before the mental terror candles inducing thoughts are resolved, all I need to do is wait for Emlyn White at the Harvest Church.
With this in mind, Klein took off his hat, bowed, and said,
No problem, I will take you there when the time comes. I shall not waste your time any further. Cheerio!
Emlyn White's expression changed as he hesitantly said,
If you can remove the effect of the mental terror candle, then you will receive a greater bounty and...
He paused and raised his chin.
In the friendship of the Sanguine.
I'm a magician, and I possess the sunbrooch and biological poison bottle. I'm only limited to mediumship when it comes to the aspect of one's psyche, so what can I do? Amongst the people I know, only Miss Justice is a close match, but she's only a Sequence 8 telepathist. Unless you change your faith to the fool that doesn't belong to this era, then we will be able to find out how to use the knowledge recorded in the Book of Secrets to help you solve this problem through a corresponding ritual. Speaking of which, vampires seem to be worshippers of the primordial moon, very similar to the Shaman King and the like. Could the ancient god recorded in the City of Silver, the vampire ancestor Lilith, be the primordial moon?
Klein said with a smile as his thoughts wandered.
I'll keep a lookout for ways to help you.
Emlyn White nodded and didn't say anything else. He impatiently turned around and rushed to the door. If it wasn't for the fact that the carriage driver was still nearby, he would have spread his black bat wings and soared directly to the second floor. Klein laughed and shook his head emotively. He rode back in the same rental carriage and arrived at the steam metro not far away. He then made a transfer and returned to Sherwood Borough's 15 Minsk Street. Before entering the room, Klein, who had become accustomed to opening the letterbox, checked for letters. To his surprise, there really was a letter. There was no stamp on the letter. It was addressed to Detective Sherlock Moriarty and was signed off with Jurgen Cooper. Puzzled, Klein picked up the envelope and tore it open.
Lawyer Jurgen?
Under the light of the street lamp, he saw a piece of paper and 2 bills. The denominations of these 2 notes were 1 soldi and 5 soldi. Realizing the reason, Klein opened the door and lit the gas lamp.
A total of 6 soldi. I fed the cat 3 times during the period. The agreement was 2 soldi per instance.
As he unfolded the letter, he discovered that it didn't contain much, and the words that Jurgen had handwritten were as precise and serious as he was.
Dear Detective Moriarty, thank you for taking care of Brody over the past few days. This is the reward you deserve. I rang the doorbell twice and found that you weren't at home, so I could only put the payment in an envelope and put it in your letterbox. As I might not be able to come back until tomorrow evening, I might miss the verbal agreement which my grandmother promised tonight. As a lawyer, I value the validity of verbal agreements and hope that they will be carried out strictly. Finally, thank you once again. Jurgen Cooper.
Klein smiled as he folded the bills and placed them in his pocket.
Mr. Lawyer, your gratitude is so dry and boring that it's even inferior to Brody's, but the explanation for your behavior is very detailed. It really fits the Jurgen style. Also, why place it in my mailbox? If this were Earth, in the time before I transmigrated, I might not even look at the mailbox downstairs for months.
Then, he took out a sheet of paper and wrote to Detective Stewart. After writing the beginning pleasantries, he wrote after some deliberation.
I found Emlyn White at the Harvest Church near Tuteva Street. It's a very small cathedral belonging to the Church of Earth Mother. It isn't very common in Lowen. Emlyn White claimed that it was because of certain matters that he chose to run away from home. Afterwards, he was taken in by the bishop of the Harvest Church and stayed there, becoming a tatif.
Klein thought for a moment before writing down the word volunteer. Then he added simply,
Thanks to my persuasion, he has returned to 48 River Bay Avenue. However, he might visit the Harvest Church often for volunteer work.
When he was done, Klein read through it. Then he put down the pen and neatly folded the letter. He rummaged around for an envelope, but he didn't affix the corresponding stamp. He planned to hire someone to deliver it directly to Stewart's house the next day. If he were to go through the kingdom's postal system, even if he were to put the letter in the mailbox now, he wouldn't be able to get it taken away by the postman until tomorrow. And then there would be the process of sorting and delivering it. So although he was also in the royal capital of Backland, Stewart would have to wait at least until the day after next before seeing the letter. Only then would the Whites be notified. And during this period of time, Emlyn White was a penniless guy with only his dolls. Klein chuckled, tidied up the coffee table, and returned to the second floor to brush his teeth and take a bath.
This is also for the sake of receiving payment early. This is truly a moving and nostalgic taste.
As Emlyn White's situation had too many twists and turns, his performance had already ended before it had even really begun, and he couldn't achieve the desired goal. Thus, he could only look for another opportunity to take the initiative for a performance. However, Klein still benefited from this. Failure was also an experience, and it made him understand at least one thing.
Unlike ordinary magicians, my performance not only has aides, but it also has enemies and participants. Their reactions and choices can similarly affect its development. I have to consider all of these elements ahead of time. This is also a lesson. It's better to be taught a lesson over such a trivial matter than to be schooled when facing important matters.
Klein looked at the empty plate in front of him and contemplated about what other performances he could initiate. After a moment of serious consideration, he realized that there weren't any. Of course, it wasn't absolute. They were just unsuitable for him to do them now. For example, Klein had always wanted to take care of that evil spirit in the fourth epoch ruins of the Tudor dynasty. But even if it was Sharon, who had the Scarlet Lunar Corona, and Merrick, who had obtained the Rampager Beyonder characteristic of a wraith, Klein didn't think that they were able to fight against the high-sequence monster. It was even possible to end up dead before even knowing why, Klein warned himself.
Taking the initiative to perform isn't equivalent to courting death. It's not about using one's life to perform.
There was something else he wanted to do, but he didn't think there was much of a chance. It was to find the strange child, Will Ossepton, who had brought bad luck to the surgeon, Aaron. Klein had always been interested in the tarot card which the child possessed, and he wanted to confirm if it was a mystical item. Unfortunately, this case had already been taken over by the Nighthawks, and Klein didn't want to get involved with his former colleagues. Klein's thoughts quickly took shape.
I'll wait for Dr. Aaron's break time before heading to the Quelaag Club and asking about the progress, and then I'll decide what to do.
According to what he knew, Dr. Aaron was usually free on Friday afternoons and Sundays in which he would play tennis at the Quelaag Club. Klein had also confirmed one thing through today's Backlund Morning Post. There would be a Beyonder gathering tomorrow night organized by Eye of Wisdom. Klein picked up his napkin, wiped his mouth, and began to clear the table.
I can't sell the Werewolf Beyonder characteristic, or the biological poison bottle for the time being. I can't even find someone to turn the former into a mystical item. The high-sequence Beyonders of the Rose School of Thought are definitely still active nearby, filled with rage. I bet they can't wait to find Sharon, Merrick, and their helper before tearing them apart. He had to keep a low profile in this area for the time being.
He had wanted to rest for the day and go to the Quelaag Club for a leisurely day without taking the initiative to perform, but then he recalled the Amon avatar, which attempted to penetrate the gray fog, and he recalled the role that the Book of Secrets had played in that harrowing moment. So Klein lit the fireplace in the living room and brought the Book of Secrets back to the real world. He then concentrated on reading, studying, and taking notes. Of course, he would later burn the corresponding notes above the gray fog. It was already noon before he realized it, when he suddenly heard the doorbell ring. After hiding the Book of Secrets, Klein entered the living room and went straight to the door. The visitor was the thin, bearded Detective Stewart. He looked at Klein with great reverence and excitement, and he couldn't wait to praise him.
You really are a great detective, with abundant resources and channels. You were actually able to solve this kind of case without any clues.
Klein was startled before he revealed a warm smile.
Why do I feel a slight change in my spirituality? It seems like the potion has been digested a little more. In other words, my performance still enjoyed some limited success. However, there's only one person in the audience, and only he was fooled into seeing the wonderful outcome. An audience's applause really is effective.